What's going on, family? It's Joseph back again, Flights and Feelings. I know it's been a minute, and I'm sorry I left you waiting. Honestly, I was feeling a little uninspired by what to say on this channel. I didn't want to make it all about leaving Christian faith. I wanted to explore more, so much more dynamics in my experience, but it's been helpful. I do enjoy it, and surprisingly, because this channel's not very big. Some of the videos get a few thousand views or whatever, but it's not really big. I get much more attention on it, like Instagram and my other YouTube channel. And so this has sort of been like more of a passion baby project. And the amount of people, surprisingly, that have recently been coming up to me and saying how much this channel has been helpful to them, I'm kind of like, I don't know why I think it's going out into the void, but a few thousand views is still a few thousand views. And I don't imagine that a lot of you are watching these videos 4 or 5 times over because they're pretty long. So that's quite a few people. And so people coming up to me and expressing that, how helpful it's been, is really encouraging. Despite some of the negative comments that may come online, I never get negative feedback in person. It's always positive, and from Christians and non-Christians alike. And I want to continue doing it. And I made a thread on Threads about some things I've learned along the way, and I thought I'd make a video about it, just kind of expound on some of the points that I've made. I forget exactly how many points are there, and I may even add some. But basically, the thing that sort of started it was just thinking about, it's been a few years since I've walked away from Christian faith, after being a visible artist and speaker for a while. And it was a humbling experience, and these were just some things I learned along the way. I was like, man, what could I share as like summarize some of this? And when I say humbling experience, it is that. Let me just say, before I start this list, a lot of people within the church see people who walk away from Christian faith as an arrogant move. It's a sort of middle finger to God, almost kind of blasphemous. They see it as people who are like, oh, you think you know it all. You think your experience is more enlightened than those here in the church. You think that you have enough wisdom or knowledge to negate the experiences of so many Christians that have come before you and that are still here living this Christian experience. And so it can come off as quite prideful and arrogant. And I can see where that comes from. And I do see that, yeah, it can be, I think there could be a lot of pride on both sides. Christians who think they know it all and non-Christians who think they know it all. But in the quiet spaces of your room, by yourself, with no one to spout fancy knowledge to, or quote philosophers or scriptures, or random trivia, no one to debate, when it's just you and the thing that you held so dearly, so highly, this ultimate reality, especially for someone who was raised in the church, and it was your world, and it was how you saw what reality really is. And it is where you made community, where you made friends, where you developed identity, where you found social equity. And I mean that not in like a social justice kind of way, but equity in the sense, the way that you build equity in a home, you can build equity in community. Where if you spend 10, 15, 20 plus years in a particular circle, you're building reputation, you're building favors, you're building love, you're building affection, you're really building equity in that space that you can make deposits into and make withdrawals from. And then when you just sort of get out of the market, when you get out of that space, you lose that community, not entirely, but you lose a good bit of the benefits that you get from being in community. You lose mentors, you lose mentees, you lose friends. You lose momentum. So when it's just you by yourself, and you have you search for answers for a long time, and you, if you can't get answers, at least just search for peace and contentment, and that doesn't come. It is unsettling. It is a humbling experience to have this thing sort of dissolve in front of you. And so it's, again, I can see how someone can see it as prideful, but if you could, walk in the shoes of others for a moment and try to empathize, that it is you feel humbled. You feel the humbling. So here's some things that I've learned along the way. Some of this stuff you may have heard on this channel before, but this is like kind of summarizing things. First thing I would say is, for those of you, to myself and those who may have walked away from Christian faith or in the process of walking away from Christian faith, and let me just say, for those Christians who want to stick around, this list may not be what you think it is, all right? This is coming from somebody who's been humbled by this. So just hear me out. And for those who are non-Christians, definitely hear me out. Number one, you don't have to know where you're going to know you should not stay. You do not have to know where you are going to know that you should not stay. The next phase doesn't have to be figured out to know that the current one is over. I know that sometimes you may even ask, like the disciple, and I think it was in John, where Jesus says, "Do you want to go away too?" And the disciple says, "Where would we go?" And of course, he follows up with, "You are the one who has the answers to life." I think that's what the response was. But that first sort of portion of it, like, where would we? Yeah, where would I go? If I really did want to leave, I found so much, again, equity and identity, reputation, peace, purpose, fulfillment, community, love, maybe even a wife, children, degrees. I have built so much in this world. Where else would I go? And I would say, I know this is easier said than done, but you do not have to know what the next phase is in order to know that this one is done. And that can be really hard, especially if you have people depending on you. For those of you who may be, youth pastors or work as a Christian artist, you make your livelihood off Christian faith. But even those who don't make their livelihood off Christian faith, you're a layman. You just go to church every Sunday. It's not money. You have something much more valuable than money in that space. You have friends, man, long-time friends. You have parents. You have family. You may even have children that you've raised in that. You may have married your wife or your husband on the premise that you agree on what this life ultimately hangs on. And so I know that's easier said than done. But to live, I know this is a really buzzword, but I don't mean it lightly. To live in inauthenticity is unsustainable from a practical standpoint. I don't even say it from a moral standpoint, some value like, yeah, authenticity is king. Be authentic. Be your authentic self. I know that's the postmodern mantra. The gospel of postmodernism to some degree is be yourself. Be authentic. Be authentically you. Just from a practical standpoint, man, you can't keep up the charade. For me, your conscience feels divided. There's cognitive dissonance, and even your efforts that you're putting into spaces feel diminished, and they wane because the enthusiasm and the vigor, the belief is not there. So this life is too short to live in a way that is not true, to not try to live in the highest version of yourself. And I know what I'm saying also feels very postmodern, but it's true. You don't have to know where you're going to know you shouldn't stay, because that also just it insinuates that you must have the next thing figured out when you just realized that this whole thing you've been in, you try to figure it out and you can't figure it out. So what makes you think that to start something else, you now have to have it figured out? You may not. People love the word deconstruction. I don't mind using it. I do mind it in some way, but I don't in some way. But the idea of deconstructing, analyzing things, once you've done it once, you realize that many things are not what they seem to be. So you can move into the next phase of whatever ideology that you want, whether it be religion or irreligion. You haven't got that phase figured out yet either before you move into it. There's so much I've learned outside of Christian space that I've explored, that I had to learn new things, and things that I thought that I would have appreciated outside of Christian faith, that I've come to also critique that as hard as I would critique the church or Christian faith, the Bible XYZ. Like that can get it can get these hands too, it can get this work too. Like that's kind of been the energy. So a life of honesty is always going to be a life of curiosity. A life of curiosity hangs on living a life of honesty. If you want to be truly curious, then you have to be honest. Once you lean into dishonesty, the curiosity dies. And so if that is a thing that you value, you think that it's good to stay curious and honestly curious and curiously honest, then you know that a lot of things you're not going to get figured out. So why do you feel like you have to figure out the next thing before you leave this thing? The next phase is going to be full of questions that remain unanswered. So not getting answers in this phase doesn't mean that you have to get answers for the next phase. Like it's just walk humbly, man. So that's my first tip. The next one would be, where do I have it at? This Threads kind of breaks things up in a weird way. Next thing I would say is give yourself some grace. For me, because so much was happening in my life, and it was pandemic, so it was a lot going on. And ironically, like I was finding success in another space anyway. I was already kind of backing away from even before I knew I wasn't a Christian, I was just backing away from presenting myself as a Christian because I just wanted to be honest about wherever the next, if I would stay a Christian, cool. Then that means I honestly stayed. And if I wasn't, then I honestly left. And I didn't want livelihood or reputation to be hinged upon that. I just wanted them to have a genuine experience. And so, pandemic was happening, and the new transition for my life was happening. I think I drastically underestimated just how heavy of a transition that was going to be, what it has continued to be. And thankfully, I've had friends. I get really hard on myself of, like I said, losing momentum and losing sort of direction in some way. You can feel really hard on yourself for leaving for not having figured out what this new phase is. And I hope I can be that friend to you via video, that friends have been to me and be like, yo, what you did was no small thing. You may think it was a small thing because other people have done it, or they were never Christians to begin with, and they live their life pretty casually without you. They don't really feel the tension. But for someone like you feel the tension. It is heavy. It's no small thing. This could take a while. Like the amount of time, it goes back to what I was saying. I remember people were probably still saying these comments now. Like people would always, they were saying this 6 months to even less than a year after I left Christianity. I was talking about it online, and people were like, are you still talking about this? 2 years later, are you still talking about this? Now it's what, three something years later, like, you still talking about this, bro? Yes. The analogy I keep giving is that, man, if you were married to somebody for 15, 20 years, 30 years, and you got a divorce, like your life in many ways revolved around living with them, living in tandem with them, living in the same room. Like you had the same mutual friends. You had so many of your core adult memories were with them, and then y'all separate. You're not gonna just even if you've gotten over them, like, like, oh, I shouldn't be with that person, it doesn't mean that you're not still going to be thinking and processing through that stuff and kind of figuring out you're always going to be looking at the next phase in light of the last one, which is good and bad. But it's true. It's like, if you get married to get remarried, you're going to be like, oh, in my last marriage, it was like this, and I don't want that. You're looking at it through the lens of the other one. And I'm not a psychologist to say if that's healthy or unhealthy, but it's definitely not unnatural or unreasonable to think that somebody would be like, yeah, you do it in your relationships, even if you haven't been married. You've had one relationship and you break up and you're like, well, I know that someone treated me this way, and so I have been moving through life looking at the lens of a very deep experience that I had prior to this. So it's a big thing, and you should definitely give yourself some grace and some space to mess up, to not have it figured out, to think you got it figured out and realize that wasn't it either. And the next thing I'll add onto this too, that this sort of ties into this, is the other point is, let the transition be just that, a transition. I think that I didn't, at least not publicly. I think privately I transitioned gradually, but even then I don't think it was gradual enough. Even though I doubted for years and I had wrestled with this idea for a while, the true, like, okay, I'm packing up my stuff and I'm going, was pretty quick. I mean, it was less than a year. And then publicly for people, it felt even more abrupt because I just didn't talk about even the prospect of me leaving at all. And then all of a sudden I put a tweet out, oh, and by the way, I'm not a Christian. People are like, wait, what? So I didn't give myself enough time to really just sort of gradually transition. I think probably from, fear, Christians, that transition to Christians can look like just backsliding. Like, oh, you're wandering away. For me, for a lot of people, it just looked like, oh, you were on fire and then you weren't. Like, it just, and in many ways, it felt like that for me, only because I felt like, even with all my doubt, I felt like faith was not just simply having faith, but faith was also the hope of getting faith. Like, I have faith, like, I'm lacking faith in God, but I believe that God will give me faith in God. Like, and in some weird way, that's also faith. I think I still kind of agree with that notion. So for me, even with the doubts, I still felt very like, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing. So, and by say I transition, I mean, give yourself time to transition theologically. I joked in a previous video about try some heresy, but I kind of seriously mean that. Even as someone who's walked away from Christian faith, I would just suggest that before you leave it all together, especially for those of you who have found yourself in very conservative spaces, theologically conservative or socially conservative, conservative black, conservative Calvinist, Reformed, or whatever, just anything that is like, high in purity, modesty culture, high in, complementarianism, high in biblical inerrancy, like these things that have just, Christians, cover your ears as I say this. I know it sounds like blasphemy, so just cover your ears, cover your ears. I wouldn't be so quick to give up on Jesus altogether. You might, but man, don't leave any stone unturned. Like, there are many different expressions of Jesus globally and historically that may mesh better with and align better with how you approach faith and reality and living and morality and things like that, that don't require you to get rid of the whole thing. And I was sort of doing that. I had let go of biblical inerrancy. I was kind of gradually, but I was still, more or less like conservative. So I would give space to be a heretic in the eyes of others and to explore, the fallible Jesus, not just the infallible one, but the fallible one that may offer quite a bit of power to you, and or at least space for you to wrestle honestly with him. So, and I think this is a great transition for my next point that I added on here as well, which is for those, whether you're staying or not, this is for more so for people who are like, who have already left and who want to leave. And you're like, all that transition, let transition be a transition. Nah, I'm gone, bro. Sorry. I would just say, and as I'm learning for myself, I would just say, stay soft. Not right now. Maybe not right now. Maybe not the time. Maybe it may take some time. But I would say at least, and I think I have always done this, open the door of possibility that you could be soft towards faith later down the line. Maybe right now it's like, it's much like a relationship. It's like, man, you had a terrible relationship. And he's like, I got to get out of this mug. It doesn't mean that you'll never be in a relationship again. It doesn't mean that you'll never be married again. It just means that maybe right now, this ain't it. And I hope that I will be in a healthy enough space that in the future I will be in a relationship that looks very different than the ones I've been in the past. But right now, this ain't it, and it's okay to just be single for a little while, explore, go through your theological hoe phase. Go be a theological hoe, man. Just go out there and explore some theology with no attachment. Just like I'm just exploring it with no intention of committing to it. Just curiosity. That's it. Just go through your theological hoe phase. But stay soft to the prospect of it. Because what I am learning, as many critiques as I have for faith and religion, for the Bible specifically, as much critique as I have for it, and as much as I've sort of uncovered of it and just realized a lot of it is smoke and mirrors, man, you may be able to shake Jesus, but you can't shake being a human. It is what you are. It is what you are. And humans are inherently religious, are inherently seeking for meaning, seeking for signs, and seeking for coded messages, and seeking for animation in the inanimate. Constantly seeking for it. It's just how we've evolved. Just from a purely material, even if you're just full on atheist, like you can't deny this. It's just like, yeah, it's hard to rise above you can't rise above what you are. You are human. And I think that societies have been injured by religion, no doubt. But also, no doubt, it has greatly benefited from our innate sort of knee-jerk to be religious. And I think there's something to that. And if that's in your bones, if that's in your DNA, then, and yet it also in your, you pretty intelligent, thoughtful person, it doesn't mean that you can shake that instinct, man. It doesn't mean that you can shake it all together and stay sane and stay a healthy, functioning member of society. A society full of others who also have that same knee-jerk reaction to be religious, to care, to have empathy, to be moral, to have standards, to have boundaries, to have tradition. So stay soft on that regard. Some other things I was saying, some other points may sort of circle back around to that to some degree. This next one I would say kind of ties in. You may leave the religion, but the rituals must stay. You may leave the religion, but you can't leave the rituals, the prayer, the fasting, the devotion, meditating on wisdom and the Beatitudes, maybe even congregating with other religious folk. The breaking away from things from time to time. Maybe it'd be for Lent or something like that, or singing songs. I've just learned that if you keep them, they will keep you. Life begins to sort of unravel without them. And somebody in my comments was like, well, that's because God made us that way. And everything is God said, but also it could be very well that we just evolved that. Like, it just makes sense. A point that I always will make is that usefulness does not equal truthfulness. Usefulness is not the same as truthfulness. Just because something is useful doesn't automatically make it truthful in a literal sense. It remains truthful in its effects, in that I see it as a principle. What scripture is that? I see it as a principle. I remember my pastor used to always, Romans 7. He said, but I see it as a law. I see another law at work in my body. I see it as a principle. I remember my pastor saying something. I don't know. He was like, I just see it as I said in the thread, I don't make the rules. I just experience them. And I don't have to, I don't feel the need to give a personal source, an animate source that is making these rules. All I'm saying is I see it. I don't know. I'm just telling you what I see. And what I see is that prayer will always be good. Meditation will always be good. Doing good to others will always be good. Clicking up with other people who want to do good for other people will just, your soul, and I use that word very loosely, but your soul needs it. Your soul will shrivel up if you don't, in some regards, live like Christians would like to live. And for those of you who are non-Christians who've kind of gone down this path before, what I'm saying makes total sense. For Christians who want to stay on the apologetic side of things, they're like, I know exactly what's happening here. God's working on him, blah, blah, blah. And I'm staying soft. I never said that couldn't happen. I also know there are other reasonable explanations. But whatever the case may be, without waiting for someone to add purpose or meaning to it, some ultimate eternal sense to it, some cosmic reasoning to the thing that you're doing, it's just good to pray. It's good to feel like there's something to be, to some degree, to a large degree, that a lot of what you have in your life is not, all the good that you have is not because of what you've done. And oftentimes you'll feel the need to express gratefulness to someone. You also reach certain points. I was telling a friend recently where your highest abilities don't match your highest hopes for life or for people you love. Like, you become very aware that I had these really, really high hopes for what life could look like for me, for my family, for my friends, for my country, for my neighbors, for my people. And yet I know, I'm reasonable enough to know how limited I am in my control of that thing coming to pass, of that hope coming to fruition. I'm extremely limited. Like, the amount of effect I have on it is about as much of effect as I have on the U.S. election. Yes, go out and vote. I think everyone should vote. Your vote matters to some degree. If everyone believes their vote don't matter, then we have too many people who don't vote at all. And then, so in that sense, your vote matters. But in a large sense, man, you are one of tens or hundreds. Well, I don't think all 300 million of us are voting, obviously, but tens of millions of people. I don't know what the full sort of population of people who vote is, but tens of millions of people. You're one out of tens of millions. So and then you throw in the electoral college in that, and it's like, so you're very small. And that's how it feels it's probably even smaller when it comes to just how much control you have over the trajectory of your own life, let alone the lives of other people that you care for. And so you feel this sense of like, I'm going to do everything I can within my power to do it. And I'm going to do just that. I'm going to do my best. But I also know that that is part of the problem, is that the best I can do is the best I can do. And the best I can do is not good enough for the highest I can hope. And that humbling experience of keeping your antennas up and just do and honoring that knee-jerk reaction to do that, to pray. You don't have to believe someone hears you. It's good. I used to write in journals as a Christian. I had this line that said, prayer, life does something. Prayer detangles the soul. If prayer, as many of Christians have heard this line, if prayer doesn't change the situation, it will change you. So it's not even so much of looking for someone to change the situation. It is that moment to pause and say, change me. And while you're at it, try to change the situation, but change me in the process. And a lot of that change happens when you pause long enough. So the next point I would say, this is random. This is kind of random in the thought process. My suspicion, some things I've learned, my suspicion is that the atheist and the fundamentalist Christian are often doing the same work. They're trying to dismantle the myth. The fundamentalist Christian, the one who believes in biblical inerrancy, the Bible is 100% true, Jesus is 100% real, everything the Bible says about Jesus is 100% true. And there's a way to make it all make sense, to mediate it in the natural world. That's why we have Christian philosophy, and we can sort of philosophize. We have apologetics. We can all kind of make it make sense. I believe that the fundamentalist Christian and the atheists are often trying to do the same thing. They're trying to dismantle the myth, the mystery, the ambiguity, the gray. Everything must have a rational explanation. And I disagree with both of them. I disagree. I think that it's kind of like muscles. I'm learning, when you're in your 20s, all you want to do is get buff, get swole. And then you just want to lift weights. You're not doing anything about getting flexible mobility. You don't care, especially men. You don't care anything about mobility. You got the tightest hips and quads in the world. Just like, but I look fit. Then you learn, like, you know what? It's good to be strong. It's also good to bend. I need to be able to bend in some very compromising positions in my knees, at my hips, at my back, so that I don't break something. Because if I'm all strength and rigid, then I can break. But if I'm all flexible and no strength, then I offer no pushback. I offer no resistance into the world either. I think that like having an ideology, a faith, a worldview that has something to say, that is rigid, that has some form to it. So it does have strength. It lifts weights, and it has strong opinions about things. The problem is when something stronger than it comes, like i.e. in real life, the ground will always be stronger than you, or another force that's stronger than you. It will break that thing rather than bending. And so I think that when you come up against hard things and you're really, really strong, but you have a myth, you have a theology, you have a worldview, you have an idea that is able to bend, and you acknowledge that, be okay with the bending of it, then it may not break so easily. It stretches to the full range of motion, and it can contract back and be okay. It will be okay. Maybe a little bruised, maybe a little sore the next day, but it's not broken and it's not torn. And so I think having a myth that doesn't have to be, all the words of the Bible are exactly true. Jesus exactly did this. Jesus was infallible. Jesus X, Y, Z. It's like, maybe he was him. Maybe I don't know. Like, maybe there's some inconsistencies in this myth, in this story. And I'm okay. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with the facts and the creative narrative of it all. Next thing I'll say is, it's kind of 2 in 1. I'll put these both together. I applaud it, but I do not recommend abandoning an entire faith practice and community in your 30s. It's kind of what I was just talking about. Like, obviously, if it has to be done, it has to be done. It is what it is. But damn it, if you can't just do it sooner, like, do it sooner. I put this one in. I applaud it, but I do not recommend abandoning an entire faith practice and community in your 30s. No. What is the next? Oh, I applaud it, but I do not recommend making your entire livelihood and public persona based around a faith and then abandoning it, like I did. Like, there are Christian artists out there who I know. I'm looking at y'all. I'm not gonna put your name out because we cool, but I know this thing is not as strong in your heart as you would like to present it to other people. And you're sticking around because you really don't know where else to go after that. But then eventually you kind of have to, but you haven't built up equity in another space. And so you just kind of stick around and sort of live this sort of odd, dissonant life. And I get it. So I don't recommend like building your life. I say as much as you can now, even if you stay a Christian, I think it's good that you will, just like a vocational pastor, have more vocational artists, where people who are who have other streams of income that do not rely on being homogenous in their faith with other people. Like, their paycheck doesn't rely on them not turning into a heretic or not having doubts or not changing their position or beliefs on a certain thing. That all the dials have to be set to one thing and have to stay there. Yo, you don't want that. Diversifying the way you make your money gives you the freedom to diversify how honestly you want to show up. And I really applaud artists. I'll just say as a side, I really applaud artists out there who are Christians. I would give an example because, I mean, he still is a Christian, so it's not saying anything weird. One of my friends, Xavier Omar, who is an R&B artist, started off as a Christian artist, explicitly Christian artist. I think he might be making some more Christian music now too. I'm not sure. I haven't checked out his newest release. The little clip I heard, I was like, is this about? But more or less, he's made his living off of just making R&B. He's made his name off of just making good R&B music, while also not being shy about being a Christian. Johnny Swim has been like that in the past. There's a lot of artists who just, yeah, I make my money doing this, but like also like I'm a Christian. And so if I decide that I no longer want to be a Christian, then like, at least now I know for those people who say they're Christian, I'm more likely to believe them, because I'm like, you don't have to tell us you're a Christian. Like, people will still come to your concerts. You will still sell out. You'll still make great music. You'll still be that guy, that woman, whether you were a Christian or not. So if you say you're a Christian without as many social or public incentives to remain one, I kind of believe you. It's the people who are financially incentivized to stay Christian that I'm like, I don't know. I'm not saying you're not. But I'm not going to sit here and just automatically believe that you are. Like, it's too many incentives. So minimize the incentives so that you can be more genuine in that journey of yours. And if you're going to do it as soon as possible. Like, go all the way in your 20s. Like, if it's that important to you, man, suss it out. Really search that thing out, and like, if it doesn't feel real, feels right, if it's too much tension, it's like, just the sooner the better. You would think that somebody who's older, the wisdom would be like, no, just stick around, and the sooner the better. The sooner the better, before you start building whole communities and you're adults, you're maybe even having children, building families, right? People are getting married on these premises. It's tough. It's tough. It's tough. I think I'm down to my last point. Hopefully this has been a good video. I got 2 more points to say. Kind of 3, but I'll keep it at 2. 1, I would say, be kind to those who revile you. Preaching to myself, I haven't always been kind to people who are not kind to me. I try to remain kind to people who are kind to me. Jesus says that. He's like, man, it's easy to love those who love you. Can you love those who hate you? Everybody loves people who love them. Even Donald Trump loves people who love them. Well, loosely defined love. But yeah. But is it possible for you to love those who don't love you? It's easy to be kind to those who are kind to you. Can you be kind to those who are not? And for a few reasons. One reason I'll say, just for your own sanity, man. Just stay above reproach. Like, you don't have to get down in the mud with people. And then I think another important point would be, there are a lot of people who attack you who end up in the same position you are that they were attacking you for. And they might even be seeking wisdom from you now that they're in that space. And that has happened to me quite a bit. I kind of suspected it, but I wasn't really sure. And then like a few years later, it's like, oh yeah, these people are coming around like, man, I judged you so hard, bro. And now I'm like, and they could have been like, sometimes the people who lash out at you the most are kind of projecting like that. You know, it's kind of like that pastor or conservative person who's like super anti-LGBTQ, and then they come to find out they've like got a whole nother like queer relationship going off on the side. It's like, you were going pretty hard, bro. Like, you were going. So I feel like it's kind of in a sense like, man, you were going really hard. Like, you're really going hard. Maybe, could it be you? And it's funny, but at the same time, I actually am kind of thankful that I've been a sort of space for people to come and ask questions or even just vent or just feel heard and feel represented, or just someone giving some voice to the thoughts that they're having. And so I would hate to burn that bridge just because they were mean to me, so now I got to be mean back to them. You don't have to be mean to people, man. Be kind to those who revile you. And the last thing I'll say is this. Leaving faith could be the catalyst to you exploring and adopting an even more expansive, humbling, and awe-striking faith than you've experienced before. This kind of goes back to my point about staying soft. But leaving the thing, altogether just letting it go, burn it down, burn the bridge, everything, burn it down, scorch the earth. And there may be some new vegetation that comes from that scorched earth. Even better vegetation, more variety, more sustainable vegetation and greens and goods that come up out of that earth that you burned. Something that was not limited by one particular school of thought, by conservative theology, by any one denomination, any one hemisphere of thinking. And by hemisphere, I mean either the brain or the earth, Western, Eastern philosophy, ideology. Like, it may become something, the faith that you had, you thought was big, and the way you view the world now may be, it may even be more humbling. It may become more humbling and more awe-striking, and it may make you feel even smaller. But that opens up to the possibilities of having a really sort of transformative, transcendent experience. And I don't even mean with drugs, not even with any sort of psychedelics, but but just through meditation and through prayer and humble patience and softness of the heart and of the mind, you may find yourself in a space that is like, wow, this is beautiful. This is more beautiful than anything I've experienced before. So just leave that door open is all I'm saying. And this is someone who hasn't landed specifically anywhere myself, but I've had some really, really, really high experiences that make a lot less sense than in Christianity, but also make a lot more sense. And it's more expansive, and just leave that door open for that. So that's the things I would say. These are things that I've learned. I think I've learned. I think I'm learning. I don't know if I've learned them, or maybe I've changed my mind, but this is just where I'm at right now in 2025. And I hope that was helpful to others. So